and welcome back to Speech Goals channel. So today, I'm going to go off of a comment that I had in our channel about sensory processing disorder. And I want to have a disclaimer out there, although I'm not an occupational therapist, so it's kind of out of my realm. I have had a lot of education in sensory processing disorder, along with working alongside a lot of really great occupational therapists to try to understand the world of sensory processing. We do offer classes here at Speech Goals, and so it's really important for us to detect when there is a need for sensory processing or just some sensory things that we notice in the classes. So that's kind of what I'll talk about today, is those little basic sensory things that we see, when it might be a good idea for you to look into occupational therapy or just a consultation with an occupational therapist to see if something needs to be done on that end. That's outside of our scope as speech pathologists. But as far as talking about like classes and things, the reason why this is a really important topic is depending on what kind of child, what sensory type your child is. So I'll talk about the first two that kind of pop into my mind that I see in the classes. So the first being the sensory seeker. So this is a very kinesthetic child. They tend to be really, really active. It's very hard for them to sit still. They like climbing on things, jumping off of things. They're the risk takers, and they learn by movement. So you can see how this can be problematic sometimes in toddlers or even children who, as they get older, they really don't have the patience to sit and listen to language. They just prefer to touch and take things in physically. So things that you might see in a sensory seeker, a kinesthetic sensory seeker, would be things like children walking on their tiptoes, or they might be walking and then to sit down, they jump and like hit the ground hard to sit down. So they might jump and like slam on their knees on the floor. They tend to climb very, very often and cannot sit still, constantly throwing things they could be throwing. And so the reason, that's one type, okay, and then the other type is the reluctant sensory seeker. So that child is kind of sitting still. They could be sitting still, staring at things instead of, interacting and playing with other children. They might not like their hands dirty. They might not like to be barefoot on the sand or barefoot on the lawn. So they're very cautious of the sensory input that their body receives, and they don't like it. And so for the first one, I think it's really important, and something that we address in the classes is how to help the child organize their little brain so that they can sit still and learn the information that they need, but not taking away the fact that they do need to move. So these preschool skills of like being able to sit still, being able to participate in a circle time for 5 to 10 minutes, being able to do a tabletop activity, these are all really important things for the future that are coming. And so it's important to get in there and start to address and work on these things now, so that when it is time for preschool, they're ready and they kind of understand it's time for me to sit. This particular mom did mention that she does a lot. So she says that she wakes up early and they go for walks to their therapies. She has a trampoline in her living room, so she's trying to get this energy out and things like that so that he is more grounded. And I would say that's an important first step, is instead of looking at how can we make this child sit still or calm down, it's can we get this energy out that this child has, and how can we do that? So the occupational therapists that we've consulted with in the past have said full body workouts are really important. So if you have a tunnel, going through the tunnel, doing these full body kind of exercise, jumping on the trampoline, going through the tunnel so that your elbows and your legs and things like that are getting feedback, and then going into something a little bit more calming is important. So I like how this mom mentions in her comment that she takes her child to the park and tries to expend his energy so that he can calm down and learn in those kind of structured activities in the classes. But I do feel like it's really just important to know, like, what does your child need as far as, like, what did you notice today? If you took him to the park for 20 minutes, is he calmer after, or does he still need more time? If you take him to the park for an hour, was he calmer after, or it just revs him up? So all of these things are the individual differences between all of the kids. But I do think that that's a really great strategy for that one parent that mentions her child's very, very active. And I sometimes recommend that. Try going to the park before your class. Try walking to the class if it's in your neighborhood. Parking farther away so that the child can get some exercise walking to whatever location you're going to. So an occupational therapist, and you can research a little bit on YouTube what a sensory diet is. A sensory diet, like eating diet. And that is like, what is the makeup of what your child needs to calm or to rev up. You have some children that are super sluggish and observant, and they just need to be more active like a regular toddler. Then we have the kinesthetic learners that are like, ah, and we have to bring them down so that it's, they're able. The most important thing to me is just getting them to the place where they can learn. So that's the most important place to get to, whatever it takes. So yes, I've heard of trampolines, but that tends to rev up according to my occupational therapist friends, and then deep pressure activities tends to rev down a little bit. So things to consider, swinging at the park, hanging from a bar is what an occupational therapist recommended to one of my clients, is hanging from a bar. So a parent holds them and then they hang there. That's kind of a calming. Anyway, so looking into all the different activities and looking at them as, do these activities make my child more active, or do they tend to calm down? And those would be the ones that I would work on. If you can put your child in soccer, if you can put your child in swimming, these kinds of things are really, really great for a child who's very, very active. And then the other part is just exposure. So there's nothing really magical that we're doing in the classes that we offer. It's really just routine and exposure. So we do expect children to sit. We don't force them to sit, but if they can't sit at all, then we work on 3 seconds of sitting, and we applaud that and we say yay, and we reinforce that, and leading up to 1 minute, then 2, then 3, and then hopefully getting to that point what we talked about, like by the end of the 3rd birthday, maybe 5 to 10 minutes of sitting without any help to come back to the chair. The other part is, I feel in therapy, something really valuable that I look at is the child's body. So if their feet are dangling off the couch or in a chair, that's not providing full sensory input. So one of the biggest things to look at is a location that allows your child to also calm their little system. In a couch like this one, I would definitely, sometimes I'll see an active learner and I might put them right in this little V section of the couch with maybe a little pillow propped on this side so that their arms feel snug, their back feels snug, and their feet are on the floor. At least there's something hitting their feet. It could be you in front of them. And so when they get all this pressure on most parts of their body, can they relax then? Because what I tend to see when I do evaluations is sometimes children are really active and they're jumping and running and climbing. And then the second that the mom picks the child up to say goodbye, the child finally looks at me and smiles and can relax for just a minute because they're getting this touch feedback from their mom and they're at my level, and that makes a difference. So does the high chair help? Does your child calm down in the car seat? These are all things that are like more in the sensory world, but just something to think about. So the sensory piece of this is your child overly active and looking for a lot of sensory input? So touching things with their hands, licking things, touching things with their feet. They need to keep moving to feel like input to their body. Or on the opposite end, the child who just observes, doesn't want to touch anybody, doesn't want anyone to touch them, feels much more comfortable sitting still than exploring. They're almost like a little old man that just wants to just hang out and not get into trouble, and everything seems dangerous to them. They don't like to be dirty, and so they get their hands. So that's the opposite. Those are the two extremes. For the child who's active, how to get them to come back down so that they can learn. And for the child who's underactive, revving their little system up so they can also learn and feel comfortable. So I would say that's my take on sensory input. And I guess the warning signs for that would be on the active side, a child who always on their tiptoes, always running, has a hard time sitting, maybe even to sit, might squat to sit, to play with things, constantly climbing things, jumping off of things, throwing things, watching things spin, watching lights, you know, all of these things that they want to take in, putting things in their mouth often. These are all the sensory seekers. And then on the opposite end, like I mentioned, almost like a little old man of a toddler who's very reluctant to do much of anything because everything seems very scary. So they might stare at you. They don't like their hands dirty. Maybe they don't like certain textures. They don't like to touch things. They might have some feeding problems. They might not like their socks off, their shoes off. So those are all the sensory avoiders, I would say. And if you feel like this, you know, idea of sensory seeking or sensory avoidance is you know, relating to your child, it could be something that you bring up to your pediatrician for sure, to see about maybe a consultation from an occupational therapist, or just looking into on your own, some ideas on the internet might be a good idea too. There's a lot of YouTube channels, there's a lot of resources in the community on this topic. So I would say, you know, disclaimer, I'm not an occupational therapist. But I do see these things very often in all the different types of learning styles that we have for the toddlers that we serve. So yeah, thanks so much for the comment, Karina. And I hope that was helpful and informative for you. Any other questions or comments, please leave them below, and we would love to keep addressing anything that comes up for you guys. Thank you so much for being here and for listening. Subscribe below to our channel, Speech Goals. Thanks so much.